Molo, Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, Goeienaand and Shalom. Welcome to another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I have a slightly new setup, so feels a little weird looking up into the camera, but I will get used to it at some stage. Welcome to it. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. You're tuned into the Big Daddy Liberty Show because it is a Wednesday at 7:30. This is your 30-minute midweek variety show here on the BDL show. Speaking about variety, do we not have a interesting topic today? One which touches very closely to those of us who live in the parts of the country that quite literally went up in flames last year in July. Those famed 8 or 9 days in July here in South Africa, where the rule of law completely but disappeared in parts of Gauteng and, of course, mainly in KwaZulu-Natal. What is now synonymous with being called the July riots, or the Zuma Riots, if you will, played out in these parts of the world and saw a body count of, last I saw, just over 360 South Africans killed during that process. And as I said, the rule of law completely broke down, where we saw scenes of looting, the mass destruction of public property, and of course, violence on the streets. But hey, don't take it from me. There's been a very interesting report. Look, I say interesting with a pinch of salt. There's been a report put out by the presidency as of Monday. This report, of course, was one that he had commissioned by independent analysts, or experts rather. And again, a reminder, if you're just joining us, please, we're about to get into the topic. Hit that like button. That's the only price of admission for you here on the BDL show, is for you to hit that you hit that like button and share the stream. As I said, violent civil unrest had engulfed parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng in July 2021. On Monday, the presidency released a report by an expert panel into this unrest. One of the key recommendations, of course, was that the president initiates the drawing up of a national security strategy. But hey, don't take it from me. Let me introduce my guests as I just master my little system now. There we go. Let me introduce my guests. This chap is the founder and the head honcho at the Action Society SA, which is an awesome organization. He's been on the show multiple times, especially to talk about his new initiative on ensuring you, the gun owner. But hey, we're not chatting about that tonight. Let me bring him on stage. That's Ian Cameron. Ian, good evening.
How's it, Sihle? Good to be with you. Looking forward to the chat.
Awesome, man. Good to have you on the BDL show. I nearly said Liberty and Friends. I'm so used to you being on Liberty and Friends and joining us there, but good evening. Welcome to it. Another chap, of course, who is a firm favorite here. I haven't had him on for quite a while, but he always sends the comment section a buzz. That's Terence Corrigan, of course, from the Institute of Race Relations. There he is. Brad Terence, good evening.
Good evening, Sihle. Good evening, Ian. It's excellent to be here.
Brother, good to have you on. And, you know, the topic, Terence, and I really have to begin with you. The topic tonight is as I said in the preface, or really in the intro to this video, it's one that touches very closely to the hearts of, you know, KZN and Gauteng residents, because they lived through it. You know, what is written in black and white ink on the pages of this report for millions of South Africans was a lived experience. Two things, Terence, just to ask you to open it up for us. This report, all 154 pages of it, what is a key, what was it primarily looking at, and what were some of the findings of these experts, and really, who were these experts, Terence?
Okay, look, it was a panel of three people, one of whom was Thabo Mbeki's legal advisor, Mujunko Gombi, Professor Sandy Africa, and I forget offhand the third name. The report itself was commissioned shortly after the events of July, and it is dated 29th of November 2021, which means that someone has been using it as a seat cushion for a while. Why it has only appeared in the public domain now is a question which, as I said, has no firm response. Spokesman for the president said that he would, quote, look into it. And I suspect we'll be waiting for that, for the results of that, looking for quite some time. But be it as it may, for those who kept an eye on events while they were unfolding, or who have read accounts that have already been published, like the book by Juanita Hunter and her colleagues, 8 Days in July, the report doesn't tell us a great deal about the events. I think they are fairly much in the public domain. What it does, and I think this is quite significant, is that it is fairly forthright about the failures within the governance system. I'm used to reports being quite oblique in their language. This is actually commendably forthright. It, for instance, talks about the intelligence failures first of all, but points out in quite stark terms that pretty much everyone knew this was coming. Civil society organizations, community organizations, religious leaders, business, everyone kind of knew this was there. In fact, they say that the antecedent conditions, poverty, the COVID lockdowns, etc., these have actually been identified by South Africa's own security services as being the tinders for some sort of blowout. So, in a way, you read this and there is no excuse that for anyone to be caught napping, but caught napping they were. It is critical of the conduct of the police to the extent that they were simply overwhelmed and unprepared for this. It uses a word which I find quite interesting, pitiful, in respect of the number of public order police officers. And apparently there was only one water cannon in KwaZulu-Natal. So if you have sort of two incidents at the same time, you're out of luck. You just got to hope that thing can shoot a hell of a distance. Then it goes on and says, okay, there's an intelligence failure, there was a policing failure, but the executive must take a share of blame. It comes across very, very clearly there, and once again, I do commend the authors for this, that there was very little coordination. Senior politicians seem to believe they had managerial authority. The Minister of Police and the police commissioner can't stand each other. There were conflicting messages about what exactly was happening. At one point, it does sort of seem like they are trying to give President Ramaphosa a bit of a bonzella and say he was proactively managing it. But I've read that whole report. You cannot back up that word proactive. In fact, what strikes me about the president's role, and this is also looking at Hunter's book, is he's almost an absent figure there. He called the most of what refers to him directly, either by name or as the president, refers to his deployment of the army, which they say happened basically too late. I would say that another thing which is unusual for an official report, one commissioned by the government, is that it points the finger very firmly at the conduct of the African National Congress by name. And it says, we have heard this again and again and again from business, from civil society groups, from activists, and they say this is that the conduct of the ANC is now a threat to national security.
Absolutely.
So absolutely. I actually came away from this moderately impressed, and it takes a lot to impress me.
Well, Terence, the funny thing is, and let me bring in Ian here. Ian, all of the points that Terence is bringing up, insofar as really a very good summary of this report, Ian, you and I literally had this conversation on a Liberty and Friends on the weekend of the violence. In fact, it was just after the SANDF was deployed. And we had a Liberty and Friends, and all of these points, Ian, you literally, I think it was also Gideon on that panel, went through in our discussion. This was not, novel information. We knew this already, which begs the question, who or what is going to be done about this? Who and what is going to be done about this? Who, in your assessment, Ian, who does the shoulder who shoulders the blame ultimately for this incident, and really whose heads should be rolling?
Geez, I don't know if we can control that amount of heads. It's going to be like a tsunami of heads rolling.
Bring out the guillotine.
No, it's 16th century France. Sikhle, let's, if you read the report as someone that doesn't know what happened, you're from another country and you for some other reason don't know what happened in South Africa, you don't have any context and you read it, sure thing. It could be something new to you, and it's well written in that respect. But I think my problem with this is that it's an attempt by the president and by the ANC to make it seem as though they have done something. So they wait for emotions to die down a bit, people calm down, then they come up with this report just before SONA. And it's perfect positioning, because all they do is they release it right before SONA, and it means that the president won't be saying much about it during SONA because he just released the report. It's the same with the Zondo Commission report. I mean, it's just so comfortable right before SONA to release the first two parts, and then SONA comes and you tell people, fellow South Africans, family meeting type of effort. To put it bluntly, there's nothing new in that report. It's a waste of time, and it's not worth the paper that it was written on. We know everything that's been put in there. Whose heads need to roll? Well, I want Kekla Sithole as the National Commissioner to leave, possibly even vacate South Africa. I think it would be very beneficial to the whole country. And I would like to send, I don't know if he's Bheki Cele's butler or if Bheki Cele is his butler, but the two of them need to leave. They need to just leave. And then we need to go and study the entire senior current management of the police. Exactly. Because it is one big cesspool of ANC cancer. There's absolutely no competence left and no confidence left from the public in the police. The police management is a rotten structure. I don't think more than 90%, or let's rather say, I don't think more than 10% of generals and brigadiers in the police currently are worth the rank that they wear on their shoulders. The South African Police Service is an absolutely failed institution. Now, Terence made a crucially important point. He said everyone knew something was coming. Now, the cops that I spoke with at that time were crying big time. They were saying, ground level guys were saying, hey, we warned our commanders. We told them violence is coming. Crime intelligence on ground level, even though crime intelligence is probably the most broken part of the South African Police Service at the moment, they told the police it's coming. The violence is on its way. They didn't do anything. And from the get-go, the whole Zuma situation was handled wrong. You do not let someone like that dictate how the police handle certain situations. If it was you, me, or Terence inside a house saying that I will not be arrested, they would send a special task force and kick down the door and arrest me. They need to make an example of these people. The ANC think they are above the law, and the way that someone like Bheki Cele, Kekla Sithole, and we can go back to Jackie Salebi's era, may he not rest in peace, they destroyed the South African Police Service, and they are busy just digging a deeper grave for the once proud South African police force.
Absolutely. And let me come in here, Ian, because Terence, we've had this conversation in particular. People often fail to make the link between what politicians do and the decisions they make and the policies they push, and of course the outcomes that we see at a citizen level in South Africa. Ian is rightly touching on that terrible policy of cadre deployment, the ANC's policy of deploying loyal party hacks into positions of government as opposed to a meritocracy that sees the best candidate for the job. SAPS, law enforcement, and the intelligence community are literally gutted by this policy, amongst others.
Yep. Well, actually, let me just read us an extract from this report, which I think is it talks about crime intelligence. There are good officers in this section of the police who are dedicated to their work, but are frustrated by the instability at the top, including that introduced into police structures by the instability within the governing party. Now, that's probably a little bit more politely than I would put it, but as I say, it is interesting that this appears in an official report, and I hear everything Ian's saying. I think that this has been timed to be released so that we can sort of take the heat off things at Sona time. And I believe that the kind of rhetorical question asked at the end, asked in the report about there were these supposed masterminds identified. It's disappointing that none of them have been arrested yet. If the president must come clean and say, what's the situation there? My sense of it is that because of the way the ANC has now structured the state, or the party state interface, with the best will in the world, it's virtually impossible to act on that. It's kind of like you've reached a point where extracting the cancer is impossible because it is now so much a part of the host body. And I think for those of you with a lot of time on your hands, read this in the Zondo Commission together, because basically they're talking about the same ecosystem. The Zondo Commission is dealing with things that, let's say, happen above the average citizen's pay grade. And yes, it was stealing from him or her, but it was sort of 3 or 4 steps removed. This is what happens when it actually crawls up to your doorstep. Yes.
Sorry, let me go ahead, Terence.
Destroyed. Yeah, no. Look, there are things that a society can withstand. Abuses. I've lived in East Asia. There's massive corruption in those societies. It's just like it's what you learn to live with. But it's if it's just someone demanding a bribe, you can you can work your way around that, and you just factor that price in. When it corrodes and destroys the institutions, then society as a whole is going to be sent some very, very steep invoices, and one of those came due in July last year.
Absolutely. And Ian, let me bring you in at that exact point, because Terence rightly brings us the conversation to the penultimate segment that I wanted us to chat about before we get to what we can do as citizens to push back, to protect ourselves. Before we get to that point, Terence, Ian, the conversation that Terence brings up is the notion of institutions, the validity, the strength, the necessity of strong institutions versus a political elite in this country who don't understand that and actually favor strong personalities. You'll often hear people say, "Oh, Bheki Cele is really great. He talks tough on crime, and so-and-so, a deployed cadre, he'll know exactly what to do because we have faith in this cadre." It's that fundamental misunderstanding, Ian, of the need for strong institutions that endure, that protect life, liberty, and property rights versus what the political elites and really the establishment favor of a sort of what's that game that kids play with the chairs? That's sort of their view. Just get the right person in and hope to God they have a chair.
He's not just a deployed comrade. I think he's a deployed communist. The first thing that the ANC do as soon as they see they lose power is a typical Marxist move, and that is to centralize power. So when you lose power over smaller municipalities in old urban areas, what's the first thing you do? You establish a metro and you push all the money into one big pool, and you can't get caught out when little bits go missing. So it's far more difficult to catch them out when they steal taxpayers' money, and it's exactly the same principle. I think in this case, the South African Police Service, let's rather say the politicians involved in managing the South African Police Service, don't want it to function properly, in my opinion. And the reason for that is as soon as it functions properly, their corrupt activities will mean that they will be caught out. I mean, we haven't had decent crime intelligence heads for the last 15 to 20 years. Since 2003, we haven't had any real specialist units in the country. Our special task force is probably the last bit that's left with reasonable accountability as a specialist unit. But if you speak to the guys and ladies that are leaving the special task force, they tell you, listen, the quality is deteriorating quite quickly. So in short, Sihle, they don't want organizations. Let's say, for example, the three of us start a neighborhood watch tonight. They don't want those type of structures to function properly because it creates unnecessary oversight. It creates unnecessary eyes to keep people accountable. Now, important part, I must check if I've got the book here in front. I actually do. This book, Rudolph Giuliani, Leadership. He talks about keeping everyone accountable all the time. That's the one major thing he focuses on, is keeping people accountable. And that's one of the major failures. And if we don't have decent civil society organizations that are involved from ground level to the top, you cannot keep people accountable. And simply saying that we need to wait for an election is not an answer. Elections are important, yes, granted, but it can't be the only solution. Civil society plays a crucial role, and they showed that to us in July 2021.
You know, Ian, you raise an important point, and I want you to sort of dig a little bit deeper before we get to the last segment, because we are in our last 8 minutes of the show. Welcome to it. This is the BDL show. Goodness, I'm stuttering today. It's terrible. This is the BDL show. Welcome to it. I'm in conversation with Ian Cameron, founder and leader over there at the Action Society SA, and of course with Terence Corrigan from the Institute of Race Relations. Fellas, I did say we'll get to the last segment in a moment, which is, how does the citizen prepare? What do we do? Because clearly this will be an ongoing issue. This will not be the last time we see the state effectively lose all control of law and order in this country and the rule of law breaks down. So we'll get to that in a second. And I did see a question here, which I want to sort of factor in. Ian, you brought up the important point here. In making the argument or fleshing out, the breakdown of the institution in favor of big personalities, you raised the idea that actually in that institution there were key subspecialties that have completely eroded away. Special task force is one you mentioned, but crime intelligence is also the one that I want to zoom in on before we get to the solutions. Guys, this thing could have been telegraphed from a mile away, yet you have crime intelligence which failed us, and seemingly that problem persists to this day with a parliament that is literally in ashes at the moment. A Waterkloof where there was also a fire there. And again, these sporadic incidents, the Constitutional Court having some assumingly deranged individual vandalize it effectively. There's a failure in this country of a key function of the police, which is to almost telegraph a bubbling of sorts in order to then have police respond to it. Ian?
I think the police currently, and don't get me wrong, Titla, I always say this, I know so many cops and I work with them on different cases so often. So I respect so many people in the uniform, but there's an institutional and a leadership crisis we cannot ignore. And currently the South African Police Service, the major role it plays is to give you a reference number for insurance purposes. That's it. Yeah. They are not doing anything preventative. Last year's riots could have been stopped. So could the majority of cash in transit heists. Why do the private sector currently, say, for example, do infrastructure investigations across the country? And I mean, that's maybe a discussion for another day. But it's because crime intelligence and specialist units don't function properly in the South African Police Service, and they've been abused to perform a political function. So they have made the South African Police Service a political iron fist of the ANC. And if that's not stopped, you cannot have successful law enforcement in South Africa with it's important, without any influence from the African National Congress. As soon as they are involved, it becomes criminal and corrupt.
Absolutely. Terence, I must come to you therefore for that last segment, because, you know, I can see it in some of the comments, people saying, what do we do? What do we do? Okay, what are the solutions? People sort of shouting at me in the comment section. And, you know, I think that's a valid question. I want to preface this question in two ways, because, again, the Institute of Race Relations has been instrumental in also my understanding around how do we reform, you know, the law enforcement agencies and really the rule of law framework, so to speak, in the country. Maybe in that vein, Terence, first things first, what do we do with SAPS? Firstly, mending that relationship with the public and also shaping SAPS back into shape.
Look, I would say that there's an overriding word, and that's professionalism. You know, Ian correctly says there are many good policemen of all colors, backgrounds, ranks, but you know, it's if you mix, you know, a small amount of a virus into a, you know, 5 liter tub of ice cream, that ice cream is still going to be lethal. You know, you need very little to corrode what is good. Institutional cultures can be reformed. The police in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is not the greatest example now after the mainland China crackdown, but you know, it went in the 60s from a cesspool of, you know, a consortium that did a lot of extortion or whatever to actually being a very efficient and honest guarantor of stability in Hong Kong. And just one thing that a lot of honkers these days are quite shocked by, that you know, the force they used to trust is now an instrument of oppression. You need proper leadership. I would say, you know, why is it that we insist on bringing people from the outside? Jackie Celebi, for instance, you know, a career policeman, you know, someone who has dedicated his or her life to this institution should be in that role. It needs to be an institution that is loyal to the Constitution and the state. You know, I like to bring up this example. In the United Kingdom, you know, it is Her Majesty's Armed Forces. Your loyalty is to the monarch, not to the Prime Minister. I mean, I had an uncle who was a career army officer in the British Army. He never voted because he felt so strongly about that. Only when he resigned. But he said, you know, he couldn't do that in good conscience, irrespective of whether it's Labour or the Conservatives in power. He has to, you know, carry out his duty according to the to the institutional structure. Now, we also have to reorient the incentives within the police force to encourage productive interactions with communities. Now, that I think is sometimes more easily said than done, and it becomes a bit of a trope. But we've suggested, for instance, looking at some sort of system where perhaps there can be input, perhaps even an election of the station commander. I mean, something that South Africans don't realize is just how large the SAPS is. Most countries have police organizations that are bound to a city, a locality, maybe a province. We've, you know, got this. I understand. The second largest in the world or something. You know, I think New York Police Department is comparable. But you know, with that, you can always just shift people around the country if they become unpopular in one area. It's everything is sort of designed to point the accountability relationship in the wrong direction, whether it is to the ANC outside the formal state, or whether it's upwards to your superiors.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that within the police service, yes, we've got to get that crime intelligence right. Because that is secretive, that has been a prime target for shysters and double fellows. If I can put it like that. The other thing is that we need detective capacity.
Yeah,
and I think this has fallen apart. There are very, very few competent detectives left. And you know, if as Ian says, it's all about a reference number. And I actually once reported a crime, and that's what they said to me: "Do you want this investigated, or do you just want a number?"
That's
said,
crazy.
Hey, you know,
that's crazy.
Funny thing there, it was a smash and grab near Wits campus. And about 6 months later, there was a piece in the local paper that someone had actually gone and looked on the stream, and they found something like 70 stolen handbags.
That's crazy.
And, I mean, really.
I mean, you mentioned, and I want to throw it to Ian, maybe in closing, you mentioned 3 key interventions that I heard there, which speak to, of course, personnel, equipment, and leadership in particular. And Ian, I wanted to close this thought of what do we do by maybe pivoting in the other direction of the citizen. What does the citizen then do to protect themselves? Because we can tell it, if for as much as crime intelligence at SAPS is failing, ours as citizens sure as hell isn't. And we can telegraph that there is a failure of the state to play its role of protecting life, liberty, and property rights. Therefore, it's incumbent on us to do that. How do we do that? 3 quick interventions, Ian.
It's actually quite simple. We don't have to stand back. We can organize ourselves within the framework of legislation in the country. We've done it many times. Last year was a perfect example of that. We just need to take up that legislative space where we organize ourselves into neighborhood watches, farm watches, etc., get relevant training, make sure that if you were to carry a firearm for self-defense, you are competent to do so. And this doesn't mean whatsoever that we're saying be a vigilante, not at all. In fact, that type of reaction that we see, people preparing themselves, able to protect their community, defend their community, doesn't only keep away or deter general crime, it also deters political crime. So you won't easily see, for example, the EFF doing or attempting to do a land grab in an area where the community is well organized. And that's basically the answer. I think, and I must emphasize, I think the part that Terence says, it should be followed as a double strategy. So it's a 2-prong approach. Everything that Terence said is crucial. And down to ground level, it's even more important. Every court case, and I know it's a pain, but every court case where someone in the community was involved, someone needs to be there. Someone needs to attend. Even if it's postponed 10 times, you need to be there. And at the same time, we start doing proactive patrols, building our own information system. Intelligence, I'm not allowed to use that word, but we start doing that and we can be proactive. There's no reason not to do that. They can't stop us.
Absolutely. Fellas, I have run out of time completely. That is, of course, with Terence Corrigan from the Institute of Race Relations, and Ian Cameron from Action Society SA. Big thanks to both of those gentlemen, and a big thanks to you for watching tonight's episode of the BDL show. What do you think about this new setup with the cameras a little bit higher, proper lighting and the likes? Y'all like that? You like that? Okay, let me know in the comments if you like this new particular setup. And of course, we will improve things as we go along. What are your thoughts about this conversation? You know, were you someone who's affected by these rights? Are you maybe someone, a business owner, who has struggled to get back to business? There are still shells. Pardon me, there's still shells and carcasses, so to speak, of what used to be businesses across this part of the world in KZN. So clearly, the effects of this particular, the July riots, the Zuma riots, if you will, are still being heartfelt. With that being said, thank you once again for watching. I'll see you on Sunday for Liberty and Friends, the one long format show here on the BDL show. Thank you for watching. And remember, if you want to support the show, all of those details are in the link, or rather in the descriptor of the video. Thanks for watching, and a reminder to never trust a commie.